Good day, everyone. So, first thing first, let me ask you some questions. Have you ever watched series like Together, the series by Win and Bright, or Game Boys by Cocoy De Santos and Elijah Canlos? Or also, you might watch Jameson and Joao's My Lockdown Romance. And let's also try to put it in a uh, international level, such as the Feel Good movie by May Martin and Charlotte Ritchie. So, what does these all movies have in common? It's all about LGBT love. So we've been celebrating the Pride Month every June of the year, and this started by the first Pride March in 1994. As we see in the celebration, colorful flags of rainbows are waved, and different types of people wanting equality and no discriminations gathered. But what do we really mean by the LGBT pride? Is Philippines ready to accept them? Are genders really just binary, or does it cover a variety of expression and sexuality? We will all know about it in our report today, entitled about LGBT psychology and men and masculinity. So we are the group six. So I am Keefe Mentino with my fellow group mates, Miss Borbon, Miss Borja, Miss Justo, and Miss Deslate. So first thing first, we have the gender spectrum. In the first reports, we were introduced some of the key terms regarding gender and sexuality. So here, additional concepts will be introduced. And first is that gender is not binary. It's not just male and female. It is neither box A nor box B. If you're not there, then it's not a gender. That's not it. That's not what gender is. Gender intersects with sexuality and our expression. So to understand better, so here we have sex and gender, the difference between sex and gender. When we say sex, it's the physical difference that are assigned at birth. The key word here is genitalia. What is the genitalia that we are assigned at birth? It's either we are female, male, and intersex. Female, when you have the organs of vagina, uterus, etc., while male, penis, etc., and intersexes, you have both. So that's just it for sex. But when we say gender, gender is the behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits typically associated with one sex. So uh, it influences self-perception, how we choose other to perceive us, and our interactions. How do we interact with one another? It's not just now categorized into two, but it's now a broad, extensive. What do you mean by broad and extensive? Meaning it's far-reaching spectrum. It's not just about male, female, intersex. There will be other terms to be introduced later by the next reporters. And to understand clearly what are genders, what is gender, let us have these terms: gender identity and gender roles. When we say gender identity, this is a person's internal sense of being male, female, combination, or neither. So this is how you identify your gender. Okay, so this is either you are male, female, or other combination. While when we say gender roles, these are roles. These are expectations based on how to act, speak, and how we dress and comfort ourselves in our assigned sex. So it's still based on sex. It's a societal expectation to our sex, which is the gender roles. So that's what we call the gender role. So to understand further what are the other genders, let me turn you over to our next reporter.
So let us proceed. So we are born biologically in a male or female body, of course, with the female or male anatomy. Yet, gender is a spectrum. Actually, millennials do not want to be defined as male or female gender. As a matter of fact, a survey of 1,000 millennials found that half of the gender is a spectrum. So next is we have let us discuss the key terms in LGBTQIA+. Here, We have the term lesbian. So these are women who are emotionally and sexually attracted to women. So it means a woman who only attracted to women. So it is very specific. Next is we have gay. So these are men who are emotionally and sexually attracted to men. So when we say that person is gay, we meant to say that they are exclusively or primarily attracted to the other people of the same sex. Okay, so we have bisexual here. So it is a person who is emotionally and sexually attracted to both men and women. So it is an identity under non-binary umbrella to describe someone who identifies with two genders. So bisexual, when I say bisexual people, these are people who are sexually attracted to both men and women. And if you're open to the existence of the entire gender spectrum, typically, everything in between through the definition gets a little vague there. So another one we have here, transgender. So it is a gender identity that is not aligned with one's physical sex, an umbrella term used to describe someone whose gender doesn't match what they were assigned at birth. So it is known, um, it is most known for being used to describe binary trans people, which are people who transition from male to female or female to male. So, however, many non-binary people also use it to describe their gender. Some people seek out gender affirming surgery as part of their transition, while others not. So, but let me just be clear with this one. Having affirmation surgery does not give you the definition of what transgender person is. That's a person decision. That's a personal decision that people make. So they have a lot of reasons man nga man hindi nila pag-ubahon. It's because of judgment sila environment or the pain nga ma-experience nila during the surgery. Next is we have the queer. So these are people who do not want to be restricted by a particular gender or sexual orientation label. So it can fall under non-binary umbrella but can also be an umbrella term for someone who does not identify with binary gender. So what do we mean by this? So it is generally that you're just a person on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum. So you could be gay or you could be lesbian. So there are trans people. Those don't identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. So this or that is identify as queer. So when we say this one, it is a bit vulgar. It's still not straight, but it allows for more leeway. Bisexual can be queer, pansexual can be queer, sexual can be queer, asexual can be queer. So questioning can also be queer. So it puts you somewhere in the spectrum without having to commit to one label. So for some people, it is a better label because it is more inclusive and it helps to unify rather than divide. Okay, let us proceed. Here we have intersex. So these are people's genitalia or chromosome patterns do not fit the typical male or female physical body. So it refers to a person who was born with the both sex. So both sex and like characteristics. For example, a girl with vagina into testicles or a boy with a penis and ovaries. So most intersexes are infertile. It can be discovered when you are a child, an adolescent, um, or even as an adult. So, what is it like to be intersex? So, in the case of Maya Posh, which is born hermaphroditic intersex person, beyond looking rather feminine or like boy, this condition didn't really affect her until she hits puberty. So her body began to develop primarily female secondary characteristics at that point, including female hips and likes. Even though she was supposed to be a male, she never really developed anything approaching beard growth or an Adam's apple or anything like that. So this confused the heck out of both herself and of course the environment until she found out about her intersex condition about 13 years ago, I think. Uh, and began to adopt female identity instead. So she have not undergone any kind of genital surgery at this point, and don't take what do you call this, intersex what do you call this, is it, I think it's hormones, yeah, hormones. So her body sorted out its hormone levels after the developed testicles and were removed a few years back, and have a monthly cycle, which hurts a lot due to the closed vagina. So at this point, she felt uncomfortable with being hermaphrodite. So she couldn't possibly be just a male or female now. So that would do dislike a lot. So ang kung paano naging invisible ang intersex people sa society, and how despite having a very painful monthly cycle kay hindi niya nakasanayan before, including nadira iya nga bloated abdomen kag ang mga cases nga naga-affect sa iya nga development. So yeah, that could be all. So another one, we have the asexual. So these are people who do not feel sexual attraction to anyone. So when we say asexuality, it is very simple, but many people don't understand it. It just means that you don't experience sexual attraction to anyone, male or female. This doesn't mean the person doesn't experience romantic attraction. So many think asexuality is celibacy, which is not true. So, for example, let's put it this way. Say someone tries ice cream for the first time. They think it's the best thing in the world and know that it's a pretty common thing to enjoy. So say that person talks about wanting ice cream all the time. So now, say that there's another person who doesn't think it's all that great and wouldn't care if they never had another ice cream for the rest of their life. So it just doesn't get their stomach growling. So people who are asexual aren't sexually attracted to anyone. Looking at someone who may be sexy or very attractive won't get their motor going. So some enjoy sex, some absolutely hate it, and some don't care either way. Another one is we have the plus. So it covers all other people whose identities and sexuality is not covered by those above. So as of right now, it's LGBTQ2SIAAP, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, for questioning, two-spirit, intersex, sexual, aromantic, and pansexual. So um the plus itself is meant to signify any other identities that we don't have to keep adding letters. So para matagaan ng hustisya kung hindi mo ma-mention ang iban nga term. So kay masyado nakalawig. So another one we have, okay, pansexual. It is a more inclusive term referring to attraction to different sexes and gender identities often preferred by trans people as opposed to the use of bisexual, which implies a gender binary. So when we say pansexual people, we may relate these people as gender blind, stating that gender and sex are not restricting factors in the romantic or sexual attraction. So, for example, let's just say for a pansexual person, gender has nothing to do with their attraction to someone. They are just attracted to people, not to gender. So, it is often described as being gender blind when it comes to attraction. So, do kumbaga hindi nagiging balakid ang gender sila attraction na nahuhulog sila sa tao just because sa characteristic sa mga bagay na nakikita nila sa tao mismo, wala sila gatulok sa gender. So here we also have androgynous. These are people whose gender expression may or may not be distinctly masculine or feminine. Example, their choice of clothing, hairstyle, gesturing, and posturing. So generally related and used in the field of fashion or dressing. So in some instances, people believe they are still at a point in their lives where they are still exploring their gender identity and sexual orientation. So in these instances, people are often used the label questioning. Pero it's two complete thing. So androgyny is the combination of masculine and feminine characteristics into a different form. So androgyny may be expressed with regard to biological sex, gender identity, gender expression, or sexual identity. When androgyny is used to refer to physical traits, it is often refers to a person whose biological sex is different to discern at a glance because of the mixture silang kumbaga bala sa mixture sang male or female characteristics. Because this encompasses additional meanings related to gender identity and gender expression that are distinct from biological sex today, are like rarely used to formally describe mixed biological sex in the characteristics sa isang tao. Next is we have questioning. So these are people believe they are still at a point in their lives where they are still exploring their gender identity and sexual orientation. They are still in the process of knowing themselves better pa kay may feeling nila may bagay nga ay munigid man bala ako. So gina-question pa nila kung ano gid man sila. So yeah. That would be all.
Okay, moving forward to the next topic is transgenderism. So I have this question that when you hear the word transgender, what comes in your mind? So does being a transgender means a person should undergo through surgeries, changing their legal or biological sex into their opposite sex? Because for me, honestly, my initial thoughts before was exactly like that. And that is a big misconception. Why? Because a person can be a transgender with or without surgeries involved. And we will discuss this further through this topic. So, what is transgenderism? It is an umbrella term for a person whose gender identity, expression, or behavior doesn't conform to that typically associated with the sex to which they were assigned at birth. So it means that how the person see, feel, and express themselves is not aligned to their biological sex. So, for an instance, a person may have born with a male genitalia and assigned male during birth. So, however, the person may feel and see the self as a female or has a female sense, and vice versa. So, they are categorized as transgender. And take note, it is not about who the person finds sexually attractive, making it as a basis to know their gender or to see themselves that they are transgender. But instead, it is more about self. So in a heteronormative society, okay, transgenderism would be seen as unacceptable, something that must be corrected. So, based from the past reporters who tackle the term heteronormative or heteronormativity, being heterosexual or attracted to your opposite sex is the standard for correctness and it is considered as normal. So, it's just a male and female and other form gender aside from those is not acceptable. But this is opposite naman in a gender inclusive society because this is fully embraced and not only those transgender and heterosexual but also all the gender in the spectrum are accepted in this kind of society. So let's proceed to transitioning process. So one way by which transgender tries to align physical appearance with one's gender identity is through transitioning process. So for instance, I was born and have a physical appearance of a female, but my gender identity is a male. So in order na magiging align yung physical appearance nakon sa pagiging lalaki, so I will undergo through transitioning process. And transgender people who decide that they want their physiques to be aligned to their gender identity often choose to undergo biological treatments or surgeries, which they are referred to as transsexuals. So transsexuals is a term that is often, though not always used, to communicate one's experience of gender involves in medical changes. So this process takes time and a very important first step is to have a consultation or a psychological assessment in order na mag-guide ang person through their planned transition. And this guidance is particularly important if the person wants to undergo through sex reassignment surgeries. Okay, so sex reassignment surgery is performed to transition individuals to their desired gender. For example, female genitalia changing into a male genitalia and vice versa. And uh, uh, wait lang. So another ways by which someone may transition is through hormone replacement therapy. So it is a treatment with hormones to replace those natural hormones when body doesn't make enough. So for an instance, someone who was born a female but whose gender identity is male may wanted to have testosterone injected, which helps the person to develop a secondary sex characteristics of a male, like a hair growth on the face or body. So we have here a sample case of a person who undergone transitioning process, and this is the case of Gina Rosero. So Gina is a transgender Filipino model who migrated to US together with her mother. So at the age of 5, Gina knew that she was a girl, which luckily have respected and supported by both of her parents. So she opted for sex reassignment surgery at the age of 9, and after that surgery, she felt more in tune and connected to her body. But since then, she have faced a lot of challenges that gave her journey a few added bumps in the road. So she had to keep her trans identity hidden even from her own agency. So When she moved to New York, she was discovered by a fashion photographer and she became successful for that. Yet, the more successful she grew, the more worried she was that her past will be discovered. And because of this, she lived with nagging paranoia that any moment she would be found out and her career would be over. And that stress was literally breaking her down. So, after being nominated for TED Talks, she took risks and took the stage as TED speaker in 2014, revealing her transgender story. So she was now the founder of a media production company that tells the story of the transgender community worldwide, elevating justice and equality. So we have here the other facts about transgender and transsexual. Okay, so the main difference between the two um, concepts is that has something to do with the way it's used and experienced. So one of their differences is that transsexual people have undergone through medical changes, while yung mga transgender people, um, while not all not transgender people have done that or did that. And transsexual people is not an umbrella term of transgender despite of their similarities. So it should never be used to refer or reflect the experience of many who are part of the transgender community. So some people have this misconception that transgender and transsexual are totally the same, which is not true in reality. So take note that transsexual people can be called as transgender if they wanted to be referred as that. However, you cannot categorize transgender people into transsexuals unless they have undergone through medical changes. So furthermore, some transgender people find the word transsexual to be offensive and stigmatizing. So why? This is because of its history and roots, which use the term transsexual to incorrectly label all transgender people as mentally ill. So some people feel that it's necessary naman to have a medical diagnosis or surgeries in order to validate one's transgender experience. But for others, this medical means will just only continue the inaccurate assumption that transgender people have inherent or a medical problem. So we have here an example issue, and it is about Charisse Mampengo, a Filipino singer who became a huge hit before and who's now called as Jake Cyrus. So his career and popularity have suffered after he publicly revealed his sexual orientation, most especially when he had undergone through transitioning process. So he received a lot of criticism from people when he revealed himself as a trans, especially her family who doesn't have a positive reaction with that, and they can't accept his decision and ask him is if he's crazy for doing such act. So those current medical and psychological guidelines, professionals and advocates within this community have spread an awareness that being a transgender or transsexual isn't a mental illness or a medical problem. And because of the reason of lack of access, acceptance, and understanding of the gender diversity, it contributes to mental health issues to many transgender people. And that is why there is a need to open our minds and hearts and listen to the voices of these people as they are also one of us. Okay? Kefi?
Okay, so for the next part, we are about to discuss some terms to remember regarding transgenderism. So there's this three main terms to remember. We have the FTM and MTF first. F, female, M, male. Female to male and male to female. Female to male, FTM means a person who is biologically female transition to life as male. While when we say MTF, this is a biological male who transitioned to life as female. And when we say gender queer or non-binary, These are people who feel that their gender does not fit the gender binary of just being male or female. They don't want to be restricted on that. And also, one of an important question to ask is, how do we know if how we should refer to someone? What pronoun should we use to someone? Is it Mrs., Mr.? Is it a he, a she, or a them? So first and foremost, the first option is to ask the person directly. If you're confident enough, you can ask directly, what should I refer to you? But second, if you're a little bit uncomfortable, uh, you can ask someone who ideally know the person. For example, you have a friend that knows that one you are trying to refer to. So you can ask your friend if what is his or her specified pronoun. How do he or she wants to be referred? And lastly, if there's no one to help you and you're really uncomfortable and you're shy, you can avoid gendered language or gender biased language and use the person's name instead. So just refer to him or her, Bobby, Robert. Just say the name, but with respect. And then proceeding to the next main topic is about men and masculinity. So when we say men and masculinities, the specific term of masculinity refers to the social roles, behaviors, and means prescribed for men in any society at any given time. So take note of the words society and social roles here, meaning these are typically social constructs. What does a society expect a man should be? That's what masculinity is. And these three are some of the important ideas regarding what masculinities are. So when we say masculinity, when it what it means to be a man, it varies across time, place, and context. It's not the same because, for instance, in a certain context, a man is about fighting in war, showing aggression, while in other contexts and cultures, it's not acceptable. Also, we have the social classes distinction. So what it means to be a man may be very different from the wealthy compared to the poor. In some places, a man is expected to be the breadwinner and the overseer of the family, while in other, it's primarily the task of the woman. So that's why what it means to be a man and what masculinity is varies and is not constant. Second is that masculinities are interpreted within a hierarchy and hegemony. So we will discuss further what this hegemony is, but to give you uh, an idea, when we say hegemony, this is the dominant masculinity in society. So for an example of this reference is the what we so-called alpha male. So when a person or a male refers to himself as alpha, when he implies superiority of himself, which he fit a specific characteristic of set of characteristics. So that's why masculinities are often referred and interpreted within that hierarchy. So that's one of an important idea we need to know. Third is that people's behaviors are often classified as either only masculine or feminine, just the two. So, for example, in military or war personnel or in securities, so the man is expected to be tough. You cannot be emotional. You should not show your emotions, as we can also see it in our popular media. This is how men are portrayed in popular media. They do not show their emotions. They do not cry. And uh, based on these schemas, males and females are just classified based on how they fit of whether they are masculine or feminine. It's just on who you fit on those classifications. So those are the first three important ideas regarding masculinity.
So now that we have an idea on the concept of masculinity, let us now move forward to its following examples. So we have here two examples. So let us first tackle about toxic masculinity. So toxic masculinity
is an exaggerated description of masculine traits that many cultures have widely accepted or glorified. This harmful concept of masculinity places significant importance on manliness based on strength, lack of emotion, self-sufficiency, dominance, and sexual virility. So this particular example of masculinity is very damaging not just to men but also to the society. As you can see, it greatly puts emphasis on manhood based on physical strength, emotional toughness, sex, dominance, and aggression. And that also shows how toxic masculinity provides a narrow definition of what a man should be. Meaning, if a man go against those traditional traits or if they display any trace of weakness or submission, they will then be labeled as unmanly. And that is very concerning because toxic masculinity is sending out a message here that men should not be soft, but rather or be in control or be capable of engaging in violence. So it is scary to think that men are forced to live up or cling to those traits just for the sake of acceptance and being called as more masculine. So the following are the effects of toxic masculinity. So we have here the first one, it limits a person's growth and definition of what it means to be a man, and this may cause conflict within the man and his environment. The second one, it may also prevent some men from seeking out help for possible health issues and other potential problems. So in here, it is very obvious that the downside of toxic masculinity is that it does not welcome anything that is unmanly, inferior, or feminine like because this example of masculinity is centered on the exaggerated version or notion of masculinity. It only advocates the need for a man to be a certain way through unfair standards imposed upon them, and that limits their growth rather than nurturing them in a positive way because it teaches them to be afraid of looking weak. It also hinders their ability to get in touch with their true feelings, and also it prevents them from seeking psycho medical and other sort of help. So that those are the reasons why there are a lot of men who would rather suffer on their own or who would rather to keep their problems on their own because they don't want others to see them at their lowest points. They're afraid that they will be deemed as mahina, as hindi lalaki, as what they say. And also other factors is that they believe that they are supposed to be tough or they are supposed to push through pain, and those are the reasons why there are a lot of men who are like who insist to ask or seek for medical assistance. So here we have the following examples of toxic masculinity. So the first one is a man is talking about how he is concerned about his male friend who seems to be going through a tough time. So in this example, it shows that in toxic masculinity, uh, being not heterosexual or being a gay is not welcomed or accepted. And as you can see here sa lalaki, as he was talking about his male friend, naging comfort niya or gindamayan niya, he suddenly follows up no homo because he does not want others na i-assume na may something sila between that friend of him. So this is very also evident among males or men. Like you can observe na yung mga friendship between sa mga lalaki, it's not as intimate, or they don't really like display so much closeness. Kasi if they do, like magsobrang nga clingy or touchy yung magkaibigan nga lalaki, they will be assumed na may something sila or bakla sila. So, a heterosexual couple having an argument, so the woman feels hurt that her boyfriend forgot about their date, causing her to wait at a restaurant for an hour. The man said, "Oh, I totally forgot, my bad." And the woman answered, "That's not a real apology." But the man got mad and said, "I'm a guy, we're not good at stuff." So this is another example of a toxic trait among men, because like it has been long known before na nagsa-struggle talaga yung mga lalaki to spit out the word sorry. It's either because they feel like it is like a humiliating to do na magpa-sorry sila, or they don't want to acknowledge na nag-make sila ng mistake, or it could also be na they just don't deem a certain situation na worthy of an apology. So here's an example. It like shows na yung lalaki, sinabi niya, "I'm a guy, we're not good at that stuff." So maybe he barely, or he never pa na siya nag-make talaga ng formal apology. So it just means na as a lalaki, hindi gid sila yan naga-initiate sang, hindi gid sila oftentimes naga-make sang apology or gina-acknowledge nga they made a mistake. So your partner being sexually aggressive and controlling. So if you're a girl and then you have a partner na ginaharas ka na, ginapilit ka na obrahon ang something that is against your will, so that is already a toxic treatment from a man. So if yung partner mo na lalaki is making a choice instead of him letting you to make a choice, then it's already getting into something na may something na gidyak magado hindi na healthy in your relationship, especially if yung partner mo is exercising authority over you. So next, so the last example here sa toxic masculinity is that showing strength and aggression in moments of conflict. So this usually happens sa magkarelasyon or mag-asawa. So if magkaroon dabi ng argument ang partners. So, may mga times na yung mga lalaki, they resort to their power or strength. They know na advantageous sila since mas makusog sila kaysa sa babae. So, may mga lalaki, not all, but there are some men na they physically attack their partner para lang talaga masabi na they defeated them or they won the argument. So the second and last example of masculinity, we have the healthy masculinity. So it's about being honest with oneself about your own feelings, needs, and desires that allows men to take care of themselves, recognize when others need help, care for others, and contribute to a more respectful culture for all genders. So this is basically about championing healthy behaviors as a man, striving to live authentically and not being worried of the standards set by the society. So, in other words, these are men who exhibit a respectful type of manhood and are more willing to be vulnerable and would never use control or violence or would never bully or discriminate other genders. So, in other words, this type of masculinity it highlights the positive qualities of men who embrace responsibility and that they demonstrate love and compassion rather than power and oppression. So, what does it look like? So, it goes far beyond a limited set of traits prescribed by society, where men allow themselves to experience the full spectrum of life and emotions without hiding how they feel and who they really are. So, in other words, this is like more about men living with integrity or living in accordance to their real identity. and they do not limit themselves to gender role expectations because they understand and knew for a fact na yung pagiging masculine, it can be expressed in multiple ways and not in certain ways. And because of that, they are not ashamed to express emotions like fear, shame, and sadness. They're also open to accept and ask for a help. And most importantly, they treat other genders fairly and respect their rights. So these are the following examples of healthy masculinity. So instead of acting like a stereotypical tough guy, a man challenges traditional male gender roles by acting as a mother figure to his brothers. Not only does he nurture and protect the boys, but he also showed the world that men can be loving and caring. So this shows that men can also be a mother figure, or yung mga lalaki pwede rin silang puwede nilang i-perform yung tungkulin ng isang babae, and it does not make them less of a man. Actually, it adds points pa nga sa image nila kasi it just shows that they care to the people that they love and to those around them. So the second one, Jake never told Amy how he feels and understand interfering would be wrong. His reaction is completely opposite to how men usually act in this kind of situation. Usually we can expect them to become jealous and possessive, but Jake's respect for Amy's autonomy sends a clear message that women should be free to make their own choices. So how Jake treated Amy just shows a great respect, not just to her, but also to the choices of women. And he did not like resort to his, let's say, iya nga puwersa as a lalaki na mamilit siya nga dapat gustuhan siya sang girl. So, but rather, he like lets the girl na mag-decide sa kung ano man iya maging choice. So this is a very great representation between partners or soon to be partners, na yung lalaki is nire-respect niya kung ano man yung magiging choice ng babae regardless na example piliin man siya or hindi, but still he acknowledged that the girl has the right na mag-make ng decisions on her own right. So the third is that men who accept their bodies even if they are not perfectly muscular or unsculpted. So it doesn't mean if you're a man and you don't have a toned body, hindi ka na masculine. It's actually not a matter of your physical like attribute or your physical yung mga physical aspect, but more of the internal one. So anhan mo man nga you have the muscles, the biceps, or you have the toned body, if you do not have the character to, to a kind of man na respeto. So it doesn't matter if you, doesn't matter the shape and the size, as long as you have the character of what it takes to be a good man. And the last is that men who share their feelings with others and cry without shame. So this is just a proof that men also go through tough times. So it is okay to cry. It is okay to be vulnerable at times, and it doesn't kumbaga take away the fact na hindi kumbaga nga lalaki sila. Lalaki ka magyapon bisan magtangis ka. It's just those who cry, sila talaga yung tuod ng men, 'di ba? Because they do not suppress their emotions, or they let their emotions na nag-bottled up inside them for a long time na i-release nila to. So it is not just healthy for them, but it also shows na they acknowledge na it is their right na maging expressive sila sa ilang pinagdadaanan or sa ilang mga nafe-feel.
Okay, so what does it really mean to be a man? Is it something related to being strong, independent, or being decisive in every situation? And what makes men different from other men, and how do cultural and societal pressures enforce these differences? Okay, there is no universal set of expectations around masculinity, and take note that men act their masculinity in a variety of ways and with varying degrees of consistency. Okay, so in this topic, we'll talk about the 4 different types of masculinity by R.W. Connell. She developed a theory on masculinity that includes the different types of masculinity, and we will define them one by one and give some examples for each type. Starting with hegemonic masculinity. When we say hegemony, it refers to the cultural dynamic by which a group sustains a leading position in social life. Hegemonic masculinity is a concept that endorses the idea that men in society are suggested to be the dominant sex. It is defined as the male having power and control over the opposite sex and even over other males. They provide a normative standard to which men can aspire and against which individual men can assess their own identities. Okay. Additionally, this masculinity is highly visible, respected, and occupies a position of authority in relation to other masculinities within a particular setting. However, this type of masculinity may not be commonly observed from form in society, but it certainly enjoys cultural acceptance at a given point in time. Okay, next is the complicit masculinity, which is a form of masculinity that does not challenge the dominant forms of masculinity. It doesn't include all of the qualities of hegemonic masculinity. They benefit in general from the social dominance of men while not actively seeking to oppress women. In society, a man may benefit from and fit in by looking the part of someone who falls under the category of hegemonic masculinity. It may also involve admiring and striving for the qualities of hegemonic masculinity. And another hierarchy is the marginalized masculinity. When we say marginalized, in general, it means a person, group, or concept that is treated as insignificant or peripheral. Ang marginalized masculinities are those that are categorized as different on the basis of class, ethnicity, or status. They may display and enjoy masculine power in certain contexts but are always and ultimately compared to the hegemonic norms and images. It is also where a man does not have access to hegemonic masculinity because of certain characteristics like his race or his status. However, these men subscribe to norms that are emphasized in hegemonic masculinity, including aggression, suppressing emotions such as sadness, and of course, they inhibit physical strength. The last one is the subordinate masculinity. It is a form of masculinity in which a person lacks many of the qualities of hegemonic masculinity. This masculinity is where man exhibits qualities that are opposite to those that are valued in hegemonic masculinity, such as showing physical weakness and exhibition of emotions like sadness. Okay, let's proceed to the examples for each hierarchy. Next slide, please. Okay, so the tenets of hegemonic masculinity include violent behavior, aggression, and the display of toughness. Hegemonic masculinity hinges on heterosexuality, economic autonomy, and being able to provide his family a comfortable life, being rational, and of course, a successful man, keeping one's emotion in check, and above all, hegemonic masculinity keeping one's emotion and not doing anything considered as feminine. Hegemonic male norms stress values such as courage, aggression, like a man who engages in physical bullying. Next example is for complicit masculinity. Examples of complicit masculinity naman are men who are respectful but do not participate in household chores. Complicit masculinities are those that benefit in general from the social dominance of men, since men are not expected to participate in chores that are traditionally considered feminine, like washing the dishes, cooking, and any household chores. Another example is men who stay silent over sexist comments just so they are not ridiculed. This type of masculinity condones or supports something without being actively engaging in it because they receive benefits from being male. Next example is of marginalized masculinity. Marginalized communities are those excluded from the mainstream social, economic, educational, and or cultural life. Men of color, males with a disability, and the poor are example of men who experience marginalized masculinity. Okay, when we speak men of color, it refers to a man whose skin pigmentation is other than and especially darker than what is considered characteristic of people typically defined as white. And the last example is for the subordinate masculinity. Within the overall framework, there are gender relations of dominance and subordination between groups of men. Okay, an example of subordinate masculinity is homosexual men. From the point of view of hegemonic masculinity, homosexuality is easily assimilated to femininity and is therefore seen to be inferior. Other example of this masculinity may involve a man acting in a feminine way or effeminate, being overly emotional or not being heterosexual. Now, next slide, please. Okay, a patriarchal perspective sees men as the center of rationality and normality. It is no surprise that it has taken a long time for masculinity to be understood as part of gender construction and to see men as gendered. So the idea of masculinities refer to the position of men in the gender order. So the contemporary issues faced by men are the following. Okay, number one, we have proving their masculinity. Okay, males are conditioned from a very young age to act like a man or told things like, ang lalaki dapat wala gatangis or something like that. These little phrases have more impact than people sometimes realize. Phrases like man up, tell young boys that they have to act a certain way to obtain the things they want most in their lives. And they are also taught from an early age that a real man takes risk and doesn't display weakness. These gender-related expectations can encourage men to prove their masculinity through dangerous actions such as using illicit substances and drinking alcohol. Okay, according to a study, the more a man looks to others to inform his sense of masculinity, the more likely he is to become aggressive and attempt to defend that manhood when challenged. For instance, men trying to prove their masculinity engage in gang violence or violence against women and children. Going down to number two is neglecting their health. Okay, the gender roles, norms, and practices socially imposed on men reinforce a lack of self-care and neglect of their own physical and mental health. Self-care at its core is a mindset. These are practices that promote mental and physical health that are essential in adding meaning and fulfillment to a man's life. However, most men have difficulty practicing self-care and often neglect their mental and physical health needs because the stereotypes that surrounds masculinity should not influence one's motivation to self-care. Okay, in addition, ang self-care often gets the reputation that it is not masculine enough. Therefore, men might view slowing down to practice self-care as a sign of weakness or detrimental to their concept of what they call masculinity. Okay, when it comes to processing emotions, there are different expectations for men and women because women are often viewed as sensitive. It's socially acceptable for them to express their feelings like sadness or fear. But in this context, men who are seen as strong and fearless are not encouraged to outwardly express their emotions. Okay, these cultural norms and gender stereotypes have been circulating for generations and they can be toxic, especially for males. Men who show their vulnerability are often seen as weak. And for that reason, many men neglect to show their emotions because they are afraid of the judgment from society. However, suppressing emotions and feelings can be incredibly detrimental to a man's mental health. And in fact, there's an evidence that men who adhere more strongly to masculine ideals see getting psychological health more negatively. That can result in their feelings building up without an escape valve, like either a personal one through talking with friends and family, or a professional one through therapy or other mental health services, and can escalate to a crisis point like suicide. In fact, while there is a greater number of women who are reported to have suicidal thoughts or intents, more men complete their suicide attempts. Men don't talk or show to people what they genuinely feel, or they probably never reach out to anyone because they wanted to figure things out on their own, or probably they are uncomfortable sharing their burden or problems with other people. Apparently, they are reluctant to ask for help or guidance, considering some male stereotypes and most likely the lack of support for male to ask for help. That's all.
So the third contemporary issue we face among all of the topics that we discussed is entitled No Tears, No Pay. So specifically in the field of sports and athletics. So sports and athletics can be the best at teaching lessons like hard work, dedication, teamwork, and sportsmanship. But there's also negative. There's also negative notions that they instill that men, that boys should act like men, socially constructed on how they should act. They should they should act with no uh, sense of being in pain. They shouldn't cry, and they should be the toughest and strongest one out of the field or court. And uh, it's something that slowly turns into being a toxic masculinity because over competitiveness, it sometimes hurts other people. So we need to try to change this a little bit and allow people, especially men, allow men to show their emotions without getting stigmatized, without getting bullied. Because just they show that they cried, just they show their emotions, they're not anymore boys. That shouldn't be. And lastly, last contemporary issue among all of the discussed topics is that the exclusion of gays, bisexuals, LGBT, especially in the men dimension. So some people may have negative attitudes towards specifically gay and bisexuals. So these attitudes can lead to rejection by friends and family and can increase their chance of experiencing violence such as bullying, teasing, harassment, physical assault, and suicide related behaviors. So we need to be part of the movement to end the stigma. We need to slowly, at least slowly accept, not just tolerate, and love and care them equally as with no genders attached. So last part of our report is just to give you more of our group insights for the whole topic. First group insight is that we need to accept and welcome the fact that gender is not binary. It's a spectrum as colorful as a rainbow. So as we discussed, we had this insight. We developed and uh, founded this insight that we should really need to accept that the gender spectrum is not just binary. It's not just about male and female. There's a lot we discussed earlier. Second is that men don't need to prove their masculinity to co-men and other people. So each personality and manliness can be different from the supposedly normal in society because what masculinity really tries to portray is what the society wants us. And we all know that not all men has the same manliness and personality. So not just because you are not uh, inclined with what the society wants you to be as a man, does it mean that you're not acceptable? You do not need to prove something else. Diba? So, as we said, there can be a chance to toxic masculinity if we keep on proving and proving oneself's masculinity and manliness. And lastly, is that there's nothing to be ashamed of not being a part of the gender's normal binary, of the society's normal binary gender. So if ever you know to yourself that you belong to genders aside from male and female, always remember to thank yourself for standing your ground and being part of the movement breaking the stigma. So uh, you have nothing to worry about if you know to yourself that you're not part of that binary gender. Uh, as we all know, the gender spectrum is as colorful as the rainbow, and there should be nothing wrong about it. In fact, you will never be ashamed. You are still important, and as we highlight here, hindi ka kailanman sayang. So you are actually a treasure because you are being a part of the movement to break the stigma. You actually need to congratulate yourself. You need to give your a pat on your back because you finally are living a life that is not a life. So that itself is a great thing to know. So always remember, hindi ka sayang, you will never be ashamed. So that is our report for this video presentation. So I hope you all learned, and we will answer all your questions and do the live Q&A on Wednesday. Thank you, everyone.